Vairagya Prakarana on Dispassion. Salutations to the non-dual principle, to the three organs of mind, speech, and body. That is the eternal jnana, wisdom, light illuminating the three worlds, bhu, earth, antakariksha, intervening space, and swarga, heaven, as also our hearts and their exteriors, and that has manifested itself everywhere as visible forms. Persons qualified to read this work called Vasishta, the work of Vashista, should neither be ajnanis, the ignorant, or the worldly wise, nor those jivamuktas, liberated ones, who have reached their jnana atman, freeing themselves from all pain, but only those who, conscious of being under bondage, long after freedom from it, and are in that vacillating position from which they contemplate attaining moksha. Muni Bharadwaja, having prostrated before his omniscient guru, Muni Valmiki, addressed him softly thus: How did Sri Rama, of rare sattva guna, come to be in this terrestrial samsara, mundane existence, full of pains, and generative of dire rebirths? To which Valmiki replied thus: My son Bharadwaja, your question is fraught with incalculable happiness to you and the entire world. You are in possession of the fourfold means of salvation, which entitle you to question me about nirvanic bliss. Hence, hearken to what I am going to say to you. Thereby you will be able to master ajnana, which is the source of all pains. This illusion of the universe manifests itself, though it really is not, in Parabrahm, the one reality, like the blue color, which is unreal though it appears in the sky overhead. The supreme nirvanic bliss is attained the moment when one, after having decided in himself that it will be decidedly beneficial to not in the least bring to recollection and to forget this illusion of the universe, cognizes through intuitive spiritual perception the unreality of the universe, which appears as real to the mind that is of the nature of samskaras, self-reproductive thoughts. This supreme bliss is ever shining, not created by any, self-existent and imperishable. But it will not be cognized and enjoyed by those ignorant persons who wallow in the mere pitfalls of the Shastras, book learning, inculcating the lower terrestrial wisdom as contradistinguished from the higher divine wisdom, which sets its face against the recollection of things visible. The wise say that the best thing for a man to do in this world is to give up without the least longing vasanas, all the affinities for objects which cause the mind to fluctuate, and that such abdication constitutes the eternal moksha, salvation, and the stainless path. Vasanas are of two kinds. The impure vasanas are those which, generating rebirths, are terrific in their results, while the pure ones are those which liberate one from such rebirths. The great ones say that the generation of the ever-recurrent cycle of rebirths, when excessive ahankara, egoism, is developed in the body, which is nothing but transformation of ajnana, is termed the impure vasanas, while the pure vasanas, which free one from rebirth, may be likened to a seed that will not sprout after being fired in a pan of red-hot fire. Those who, having developed the pure vasanas, support a body simply to wear out their prarabdha karmas, and do not again subject themselves to the pangs of rebirth may be said to have attained the Jivan Mukti state, embodied salvation, which enables one to perceive all spiritual things through the subtle jnana experience, and to enjoy the bliss of Chidananda, conscious bliss state. Again Muni Valmiki continued thus, May you, O my son, liberate yourself from births and deaths after meditating truly through your intelligence upon the path pointed out by Vashista to Rama, who heard him intently, and reached the glorious and incomparable Jivan Mukti state, becoming well versed in all the four Vedas and all the departments of knowledge. Rama spent his youth sportively and hence fearlessly for some time. After his frolicsome days were over, there arose in him a desire to visit all places of pilgrimage, able to confer spiritual benefits, and the sacred ashrams, hermitages of the wise. For this purpose Rama, of blue complexion and lotus eyes, approached his father like a hamsa, swan, and having prostrated himself before his lotus feet, addressed him thus, Father, my mind longs after the visiting of ancient places of pilgrimage, sacred shrines and the forest resorts, where the munis perform their tapas, their religious austerities. There is no boon, however great, which it is not in your power to grant. Please, therefore, be kind enough to allow me to carry out my intentions. Thereupon Dasaratha, his father, in consultation with his world-famous Vashista, gave his assent to it with a request to his son to return soon. Then, having paid due respects to his father, Rama, whose complexion was blue, set out on his holy pilgrimage along with his brothers on an auspicious day. Having crossed their Kosala kingdom, they spent their days delightfully passing through and observing all kinds of rivers, forest in which tapas was performed, the hermitage of ascetics, sandy deserts, seaport towns, slopes of hills, etc. Then Rama, eulogized by devas, celestials, and worshipped by men, returned like Isa and Jayanta, son of Indra, returning to Jivapura and Devaloka respectively, and reached, amidst the thick showers of flowers and praise of men, where his father abode. There he described in detail all the events of his trip and the diverse customs obtaining in different countries. Thereafter he was in the habit of daily rising up from his bed before daybreak and performing his daily ceremonies. Having paid due respects to his father Dasaratha, he would daily hear many kinds of stories, pregnant with wisdom and justice from the lips of Vashista and other munis of great tapas. According to the directions of his father, he would be sometimes engaged in the chase along with his retinue. Having supped with his distant relatives, friends, and brothers, he would pass his night sweetly. Thus did he pass his 15th year, assisting and pleasing kings and others like the cool moon or delicious nectar. At this period of his life, his once radiant body became all at once emaciated, like the river floods going down in the summer. His red, cool face of long eyes became wan like a white lotus, and he ever seated himself in the Padma posture, with his hands resting on his chin, and his young feet tinkling with bells. When wholly absorbed in pensive thought, he forgot to perform his daily allotted duties of life, and his mind grew despondent. His followers, noticing the ever statue-like position their master assumed, fell at his feet and asked him the cause of his moody temper, to which Rama merely replied by performing his daily rites with such a depressed mind and dejected face as affected all who saw it. Being apprised of this fact, his father Dasaratha sent for him one day and having seated him on his lap, asked him to explain the cause of his grief. Rama simply prostrated himself at his father's feet and took leave of him, saying there was none. At this juncture, the world-famed Muni Visvamitra appeared in the council hall of the king. Thereupon the crowned king of kings, Dasaratha, having saluted the Muni and paid according to rules due respect to him, addressed him thus: "You were pleased through your kind grace to vouchsafe me a visit at a time when your servant least anticipated it. Your presence has removed all my sins. I am now like a lotus which has blossomed fully at the approach of the sun. Never did I before feel the bliss I do now. To me your presence here resembles the rain cooling the plants suffering from long drought, or the eye miraculously recovered by a person blind. The bliss arising from the advent of your venerable self has cooled my whole body like Ganges water, and removed all depression from my heart, as if this very body of mine had levitated and been moving in the Akasha, or as if the jiva, ego, had once departed out of a body, came in again to tenant it, or as if I had come by the nectar vase deposited within the fortress of Agni in Devaloka, and containing ambrosia churned out of the roaring ocean of milk. O Muni of rare tapas, free from love and hatred, the pains of sensual objects, instability, vain anger, or the dire rebirth or disease, your arrival here has taken me by surprise. I consent to part with any object you expect to receive from me. Therefore please intimate to me your wish." Thereupon the Supreme Muni, with the hairs of his body standing on ends, said, "O Maharaja Dasaratha, who has many a king under your subjection, and contravenes not the words of your guru Vashista, you have delivered yourself of words that are well befitting one descended from the noble Surya, solar family, unable to bear the atrocities committed by the Rakshas who stand in the way of my attempt at the performance of one of the foremost of yagnas, sacrifices. I have come to you for redress. I hope, therefore, you will hand over to me your eldest son, Raghava, Rama, of great probity, who is simply Yama, death, to the delusion-producing Rakshasas. Being as he is a terrific lion in strength and Devendra in intrepidity, Raghava will easily put an end to the invincible Rakshasas. Therefore, O king, cast aside all fears about him on the score of his youth. Munis like me will never direct their minds to dubious matters which will involve persons in pain. It is only men, like myself and Vashista, that can really gauge the unfathomable greatness of Rama, who is superior to all. If you care for greatness, dharma, virtues, and fame, then you should hand over to me Rama at once. There is nothing which truly noble persons withhold from a suppliant. If you dost give him over to me, I tell you truly that Rama will annihilate the brave Rakshasas." Hearing these words of Visvamitra, Dasaratha was bewildered, and after a muhurta breathed the following words in a plaintive tone: "My son is very young, being not yet turned 16. He has not fought up to now. Therefore he will not be able to cope with the Rakshasas of terrible prowess. He is quite ignorant of the tactics of war and meeting his foes. Therefore your poor servant will himself go in his stead and with the fourfold army and fight with them. Should Rama, my eldest son, part from here, my other 3 sons will not find themselves alive afterwards, nor is it likely I shall outlive one moment his separation. Now I am not afraid of any enemy other than Ravana, though before I was not afraid of him too. Will the courage of warriors who make their enemies retreat before them be ever a fixed quantity? Time, in its revolution, works miraculous changes in all things. The mighty become weaklings. As I am old, I am grieved as to what I should do hereafter. Thereupon Visvamitra said with great wrath, having promised me first, you have overstepped truth. A warlike leonine king like you to conduct yourself like a paltry beast? You may live happily with your wives, sons, and other relatives. I will repair to the place whence I came. Observing these events taking place, Vashista interposed and said to Dasaratha, born as thou art in the race of Manu, and dubbed with the title Emperor Dasaratha, you should preserve your word inviolate. If your tongue should err, who else will maintain his word? If your subjects on this earth will unfailingly act up to the strict justice enunciated by you, with a spirit of true reformation, then a fortiori, O king, you should not fail to act up to it. This Muni Visvamitra will protect your son Raghava completely, like ambrosia guarded by fire, in Devaloka, and therefore the Rakshasas, who have war only as their avocation, will not be able to inflict the least injury on your son. At these words of Vashista, Dasaratha of puissant arms inquired of the followers of Rama as to what he, whom he obtained through the grace of the great ones, was doing. Thereupon they began to describe in the following manner the grievous plight of their master, ever since his return from pilgrimage. It is only after entreating him by falling at his feet that he performs some of our daily ceremonies. He says, of what avail are the pleasures, giving, offspring, wealth, house, etc., being as they are, only unreal? Our master has no inclination towards valuable white clothes or dainties of 6 tastes or cool water or anything else. Like ascetics devoid of all egoism, he is freed from all abhimana, identification of self with objects, and he has no inclination towards state affairs. Neither does he rejoice at happiness, nor is he afflicted by pains. He grievously complains of his life being spent in vain in the many worldly actions that do not contribute to the Jivan Mukti state, wherein all sorrows are unknown. Thinking that his great wealth is a source of infinite danger, he has given up all longing for it, and gives it away indiscriminately to all. We are not able to divine the underlying thought in his heart. Oh, for one in this assembly who will be pleased to instill into our young king all the noble qualities that will befit him to be a ruler of our kingdom. These are the characteristics which our prince evinces. At these submissive words of Rama's followers, Vashista told them the following: Go ye and fetch this greatly beloved Rama, unknown to others, like a deer that is strayed away from its herd. Then, addressing the assembly, he said, The great delusion that has now arisen in him is unlike any that springs out of disappointment as to any desired object or out of a great accident, but is only the stepping stone to the acquisition of divine wisdom through VAIRAGGYA, indifference to worldly objects, and viveka, true discrimination. Like us, he will attain the quiescent state of Brahman after removing from his mind all his delusion of doubts through the many-sided reasoning of the stainless Atmic inquiry. Rama's mind will soon become full, and then he will perform sweetly and nobly all actions on behalf of men. While the Muni was saying this, Rama appeared before the regal assembly and prostrated himself at the feet of his father, and then at the feet of Vashista, Visvamitra, Brahmins well versed in all departments of knowledge, and the teachers imparting learning. Then, having received the prostrations of his inferiors, he recognized their salutations with words of respect and gestures of the eye. On the king asking him to come over and sit on his lap in the throne, he merely spread his folded cloth on the ground and sat on it without going up to him, at which the king addressed him thus: "O my son of rare knowledge, why should you, whom all should look up to as the seat of eternal bliss, pine away thus with this body of rare bloom emaciated, and your mind despondent even for a moment, like the ignorant? Men like you, with a mind bereft of all desires, have attained easily the nirvanic seat, as stated by our Guru Vashista, who is a revered sage and brahmarshi. Then why are you grieved thus in vain? All those accidents that bring on pains will never approach you, should your present delusion depart." After Dasharatha, the crowned king of kings, had said this, Vashista began, when Visvamitra interrupted him thus: "O you redoubted champion, that have conquered easily your enemies of sensual objects, which are invincible, except through supreme efforts, drown not yourself in the ocean of delusion full of ajnana, which is befitting only the ever-fluctuating ignorant persons of the world. If you will reveal to me the cause of the delusion, preying upon you like a subterranean cat, undermining a good house, then you will be relieved of it, and be also able to attain your longed-for object. Moreover, your mental grief will thereby vanish to appear no more. Please, therefore, speak out." At these words of Visvamitra, Rama, relieved of all grief and quite jubilant, like a peacock at hearing the thunder sound in the clouds when the air becomes cool, addressed Visvamitra thus: "O Supreme Muni, the incarnation of grace and of great tapas, as you were pleased to allow my ignorant self to relate the cause of my grief, I will do so. Now please hearken to the impediments in my way. Born in the house of Dasharatha, my father, I became well versed in all departments of knowledge and conducted myself strictly according to the dictates of religion. Then I circumambulated this great earth girt by ocean, bathing as I went in the many sacred waters. With my return from the pilgrimage, all my desires for this delusion of the universe have ceased. There is not even an iota of bliss in this world. Destruction, death exist only for birth, and birth is for death again. Therefore all are illusory in this world. All worldly things are generative of pains only, fraught with all dangers, unrelated to one another, related to one another only through sankalpa of the mind, obdurate like an iron rod, and fruitful of great material wealth. Therefore, of what avail are the enjoyments of objects and kingdoms? If we set about inquiring whence came the I, or the body we have, we find that all those which are foreign to Atman are nothing but unreal, all things being unreal. When I begin to further inquire as to which generates which among these things, I cease to have any love for them, like a traveler, who, when he is convinced of the undulatory mirage in a desert not being water, never after craves for it. In trying to find out the path which will relieve me from the pains of the unconquerable sensual objects, I am burning within, like an old tree, which is consumed within, through the heat generated by itself through its old age. This unbearable, dire delusion of mine is like a stone sticking in my gullets. Being afraid lest my relatives should condemn me for this grief of mine, I tried in all manner of ways, and yet I am unable to get out of it though I cried aloud. Wealth, like one's family with children, etc., that will not make him happy who is beset with the highest of dangers, wealth which only makes host of thoughts to whirl in the brains of men, will not confer bliss. Just as a king allies himself with any person who owns his supremacy, no matter whether that person be noble-minded or base, so wealth, which is attained by any person who flies to it for refuge, tends, however serviceable it may be, to the condemnation of the spiritually wise, and hence is base. Who is there in this world whose mind does not thaw like ice at the sight of wealth, or whirl in the maelstrom of wealth which embitters the happiness arising from the quintessence of the sweet discourse of the spiritually wise, through the venom of love, hatred, etc., created in such worldly men by the manifold evil effects of wealth? Like a ruby that gets blurred with a coating of dust, all persons, whether they are beneficial to their relatives or not, whether they are intelligent or poor or warlike, succumb to this desire and are degraded. It is rare to find blameless, opulent men, word-keeping warriors or kings who look equally upon all their subjects. This wealth, which the mind covets and is very ephemeral in its nature, is utterly useless, like a flower bud in a creeper growing in a well and encircled by a serpent. Life. Then, prana life, which is like a drop of rain water dripping from the end of a leaf turned overhead, flits out of the body, like an idiot at unseasonable times. It is only by being bitten by the serpent of the ever-waxing desires of the five senses that persons without true jnana begin to droop in their minds and thus shorten their lives. I do not rejoice in this life of mine, which darts like a flash of lightning in the cloud of delusion, regarding this my limited body as real. It is possible to cleave the all-pervading akasha or restrain the stormy winds, or still the waves that ever and anon arise on the surface of the water, but to disappear. But by no means is it possible to resist this desire of life which should not be considered as permanent. This life is ephemeral, like autumnal clouds or a geeless lamp or ocean waves. Though appearing as real, it has not the least quiescence, is steeped in boundless ignorance, and is devoid of the true end of human life. If we inquire into its fruits, we find pains are only generated like unto the pangs of delivery. That is the noblest life in which persons, after attaining the highest atmic wisdom, replete with bliss and free from all pains, spend their lives in ceaseless atmic inquiry, without wasting their time like such base things as trees, beasts, or birds. The lives of those who have freed themselves from rebirths are the true ones and the noblest. But others' lives are like those of old asses. In the case of persons without discrimination, learning is a burden to them. In the case of persons without quiescence of mind, their mind is a burden to them. But in the case of persons having passion and other stains, atmajnana is a burden to them. In the case of persons who have not enjoyed the bliss in their own self, the beautiful body, life, manas, buddhi, ahankara, actions, etc., are intolerable burdens to them like those of a carrier. Life, after associating itself with this body, departs out of it even while young, like the wise who shun the association with the wicked. There is nothing as baneful as this life which is perishable in its nature and fleeting in the bestowal of pleasures. Ahankara. I am much terrified by the enemy of the illusory and harmful ahankara, I amness or egoism, which is generated through delusion and permeates me all throughout. It is only through ahankara that all the mental cares, dangers, and the ever-increasing actions of life arise. There is no enemy greater than he. Having associated with this enemy of mine for a long time, I am now in an agitated state of mind. I do not taste food with water. Why need I speak about other enjoyments? All our daily ceremonies, yajnas, sacrifices, the enjoyables and others associated, as they are with ahankara, are merely unreal. Therefore the real secret lies only in the renunciation of this ahankara. So long as this ahankara beclouds us, so long will the flowers of desires bloom and increase in us. Though I have given up all karmas, actions, in order to free myself from ahankara, yet my pains have not ceased. Not having cognized my own self, may you, O Rishi, be pleased to bless me in order that I may liberate myself from this cursed ahankara, which is the source of all dangers in this world, is evanescent, has its seat in the mind, and is idiotic in its nature and without due discrimination and intelligence. Manas. Then my manas mind is tossed about in objects of love and hatred, etc., like a feather in a stormy wind. It ever whirls far and wide in vain and sensual objects away from the association with the wise, like a strolling city dog, but no results accrue therefrom. Like a flower bamboo case which is not able to hold the water in it, this baneful mind does not hold the joy, or enjoy the happiness within, but whirls at the sight of its much coveted immense wealth. This ferocious dog of mind, following its mate of desires, ever preys upon poor ignorant me like a carcass. Just as a straw is tossed to and fro in the air by a whirlwind, this mind of mine subjects me to all kinds of delusions and pains and tempts me far into the great void. This terrible mind, which appears to be of the nature of the causeless Maya, but which is otherwise, through right inquiry, leads me into the many worldly actions like a lad obsessed. It will flit in a moment from earth to Patala, lower world, and thence back again to earth. This deceptive mind, in seeming to lift me up to higher states, hurls me to still lower ones, like a decayed rope that is used in lifting wood out of a well. This monster of the venomous mind is more terrible than fire itself, more insurmountable than mountains, and more obdurate than a huge diamond. It is possible to drink up the contents of the ocean, eradicate the mountain, Mahameru, to its root, or swallow the flaming fire. But it is impossible to control this mind of ours. It is the one cause of the generation of all objects. This perishable universe exists only when the mind exists, but disappears with the absence of the latter. Therefore the mind should be annihilated. All the hosts of pains and pleasures, which are like mountain fastnesses, arise through the mind only. Hence, I conclude they will perish, should the mind perish through stainless discrimination. Desires. The pack of owls called passion and anger play in the akasha of Atman during the night of restless desires, enveloped with the intense gloom of dire delusion. All my much longed-for virtuous actions are entirely gnawed away by my desires, like a fiddle string by a rat. Being without a mind of Atman-jnana, I am enmeshed in them, like a bird, caught in a trap and drooped thereby. The fire of desires has scalded me quite. In my present state, I do not think that even a bath in ambrosia will cool me. Like the sable darkness on the new moon day, they make the most undaunted of persons to quail with fear, daze the eye of good intelligence, and create tremors even in the hearts of the wise of sweet patience. This old harlot of desires of the nature of the ominous owl ever follows persons in the hope of inciting them to earn wealth, but in vain. Like a dancing woman who, though enfeebled by age, dances in vain without true joy. All my desires play in me in a similar manner and afflict me. They will try to encompass things beyond their reach, but even in such things are within their grasp, they will pass over, and again long for happiness in other things. Like monkeys, they roam about without any fixed seat. Like bees that rejoice, flying from flower to flower in another garden, they traverse in a moment Patala, Akasha, and all the 8 quarters of the world. It is these ever-waxing desires that bring on the pains of rebirth, the heaviest of all pains. The devas, celestials, extol disinclination of the mind towards desires as the greatest panacea for the remedy of the diseases of desires which afflict even those living in palatial mansions guarded by forts. It is desires that make the deep inner man manifest itself externally, like radiant damsels wearing golden bracelets, or diseases, or the rays of the sun, which make the lotus bud blossom forth and appear externally. These desires of the mind, which are like a diamond point or a sharp-pointed sword, or like the sparks of iron emitted out of fire, will in a moment reduce to nothing those men great as Mahameru, or the handsome wise men, or the courageous, or warriors, or any others. This body, which is composed of the cool intestines, muscles, etc., and is subject to changes, being at one time fat, and at another time lean, shines in this mundane existence simply to undergo pains. What more palpably fruitless, pain-giving, and degraded thing could be conceived of than this body, which oscillates with pains or pleasures through the increase or decrease of the experiences of objects? Of what avail is this body, whether eternal or otherwise, liable to pains and pleasures which house is tenanted by Ahankara, the householder having the 10 mischievous cows of Indriyas, or the organs, the servant of Manas, mind, producing Sankalpa, and his partner of desires with the portals of the mouth wherein are adorned the festoons of many teeth, and the monkey of the tongue. If this body, which is the medium of the enjoyment of wealth, kingdom, actions, etc., exist always, then no doubt it is one that should be longed after. But all these will vanish with the advent of Yama, death, at his appointed time. What beauty is there to be enjoyed in this body which is composed of blood and flesh, has the tendency to rot, is the same for the rich as well as the poor, and being without discrimination is subject to growth and decay? Only he who relies with certainty upon a lightning flash or an autumnal cloud or a vast Gandharva, illusory city, will cling to this body as true. Infancy. Whatever person you are born as in this ocean of samsara, mundane existence rolling with many waves of diversified actions in a restless and fluctuating state, the period of infancy is ever the cause of intense pains. This period is ever attended by unavoidable dangers, weaknesses, inability to convey ideas, ignorance, desires, and instability of thought. And in this body it is that the mind functions and outdoes in its fluctuation the ocean waves, or a damsel's eyes, or the flames of fire, or lightning flash. It, this infant, feeds itself on offal like a roving dog and rejoices or weeps at trifles. Sometimes it eats the dust and invites the moon in the sky to come near it. Will all this ignorance constitute bliss? This mischievous period of infancy, which creates terror in the hearts of one's master, parents, relatives, elders, and others, is the source of perpetual fear and a nest replete with many stains. The bawd of non-discrimination will find a safe asylum in it. During this period, none enjoys happiness. Youth, having crossed this period beset with many dangers, one reaches the period of youth liable to another kind of pains, and then reels and droops under the heavy blows dealt by the devil called Manmanta, the god of love, who lives latent in the hollows of his mind. His noble intelligence, though broadened in its views through a study of all departments of knowledge, though illumined in mind through the service of the Guru, and though purified through good karmas, will yet be defiled then like a muddy stream. The gigantic car of Routh grows more and more in this forest of body, and then the deer of mind falls giddily into the pit of sensual objects in it. The pains increase so long as there are pleasures of youth to be enjoyed. Similarly, too, the desires increase mightily till the youth is over and work manifold mischief. He only is a man who has acquired the power to easily attain while young salvation, overcoming all the obstacles of youth. Such a person is it that is fit to be worshipped by all, is truly wise, and is one that has known his true state. Is there to be found in this universe the period of youth in the lives of any fraught with such inestimable qualities as grace, humility, etc., and fit to be the safe asylum of persons? We may as well look for a spacious forest in the sky above. Lust. What happiness is there to be derived from the string-tossed puppets of female bodies composed of joints, muscles, bones, and flesh? Oh, there will arise very fine desires, no doubt, for women having soft tendrils of hair, if we once dissect or analyze with our minds their eyes and other parts of the body into their components of skin, flesh, and blood, as well as tears, etc. The breasts of females, adorned with pearl, garlands, and other ornaments, like unto the waters of the Ganges with its long waves flowing down from the great Meru heights, are preyed upon or enjoyed by bipeds like packs of dogs, licking balls of cooked rice strewn in the crematoriums in the suburbs of a town. Which person is there in this world that will not be burnt like straw when exposed to the flames of females proceeding from Agni, fire, the sin, and having darkness in the shape of sable locks, and scalding men with their eyes? The cool bodies of females, which one enjoys, serves as the dry fuel with which to burn him in hell. Dames with dark eyes are so many traps set by Kama, god of desire, to ensnare the ignorant minds of men. They resemble also the bait of flesh strung in the angling noose of excruciating torments, in order to lure the fish of men in the pool of rebirths replete with the mud of the dire mind. Oh, I will never long for the pleasures of women who are like caskets locking up within them infinite miseries and having within them the gems of the endless desires, hatred, etc. If we begin to analyze this body into flesh, blood, bones, muscles, etc., then all our desires towards females, said to shine with the moon's resplendence, will become inimical to us in a short time. Only he who has a spouse and tastes the conjugal pleasures lust after such an enjoyment. Otherwise, how can he feel the pleasures of conjugal life? If the lust of women, which is the source of all enjoyments, ceases, then all the worldly bondage which has its substratum in the mind will cease. With the cessation of the conception of this universe, which exists only in name, there dawns the eternal Elysian bliss. This lust of women, which being without discrimination is enchanting at a distance, craves always, even if gratified, and flutters like the wings of a honey-bee, and is hard to be given up. Being afraid of the terrible consequences it works, such as diseases, death, dotage, and the mental and other pains, I do not long after it now. How, without its renunciation, can I expect to attain the rare Brahmic seat? Dotage, the never-ending stage of infancy, is devoured or succeeded by the stage of youth. The latter is, in its turn, devoured by that of old age with its great changes. If dotage sets in, accompanied as it is by delusion, diseases, pains, etc., then one's ripe intelligence bids adieu to him, like the affection of a husband towards his first wife after marrying a second one. With dotage, there ensue manifold pains, such as decline in this body of 9 gates, forgetfulness, inability to gratify the desires or perform the requisite actions, dire diseases, complete helplessness in getting at things required, and the scorn heaped upon him by his sons and others. Friends, issues, relatives, servants, and others will laugh at the poor man who is quivering with old age. Like owls resting in the hollows of a tree, his desires will abide in this uncouth form of his, full of pains and grayness and devoid of strength and good qualities. In this old age beset with frailties and imbecility, when all dangers having as their handmaids desires burn one's heart, all imaginary fears arise in him as he is unable to cope with the desires which arise involuntarily in him, and to contemplate upon the beneficial nature of the existence in the higher world. Thirst of joy and material objects will increase with old age, but the person will be powerless to gratify that thirst. Being unable to enjoy them, all his thoughts will droop and wither. Death lays at the hand on gray heads, which are like ripe pumpkins of the genus that become gray at their proper time. It is before the king called Death that the armies of mental and physical diseases march in procession in this world, having the insignia of the chamara called grayness. In the tabernacle of this body, whitewashed by grayness, there live the dames called dangers, imbecile mind and diseases that make one droop. What bliss can we expect to derive from association with this, the old gray hag of dire dotage? It is very difficult to do away with the desires of old age by getting rid of the 3 kinds of desires, of son, wife, and wealth, very easily. Kala. All the pleasurable objects of enjoyment in this world arising from ajnana, in the series of rebirths, takes leave with the arrival of yama, death or time, like a thread nibbled by a rat. There is nothing in this world which is not devoured by kala, time, like Vadava Agni, the deluge of fire, quenching the ocean waters abounding in crocodiles, fishes, etc. Even in the case of the ineffable great ones, he will not wait a minute beyond the allotted time. Having swallowed up everything, he would be all himself. Even glorious divine kings, the beneficent Brahma, Asura Vitra, of the might of Mahumeru, and others, come under his clutches, like a serpent under an eagle's grip. He will easily destroy all things, whether they may be tendrils or leaves, a straw or Mahumeru, the ocean waters, or the lofty Mahendra mountains, and wield them according to his will. He now creates in the morning this forest of the universe, with the Aswata fig tree, wherein grow the fruits of the mundane eggs buzzing with myriads of the flies of egos, and having seen them ripe in the noon through his eyes of the sun, plucks them now grown as the guardians of the quarters, and eats them up at night. He also strings in a rope of 3 gunas, even the gems of the highest men of the universe, and makes them his prey. In this dilapidated dwelling of the small universe, he collects, in the casket of death, all the worldly men scattered everywhere in it like rubies. Having hunted all the eagles of beasts, birds, etc., in the great forest of this essenceless universe, he at last, during the Mahakalpa, sports in the tank of the great ocean filled with the lotus of the shining Vadava fire. This personage of time has in the repast made of the diverse created worlds all the living ones as his dainties of the 6 tastes, such as bitterness, etc., and the incomparable 7 seas of milk, clarified butter, etc., as his beverage, and cycles round and round in the objects created at every Mahakalpa. Destructive Shakti. This invulnerable and destructive Shakti, potency of Brahman, does away with the universe with all its moving and fixed objects, and reigns triumphant, like a tigress in the forest of delusion, along with her attendants, the goddess Durga and others. Having put an end to all living beings and the universe, she holds up in her hand a honeyed vessel, which is this earth, and wears on her breast the 3 lokas, worlds, as a garland composed of the 3 lotuses, blue, red, and white. In her arm, she carries like a sportive parrot in a cage, a man-lion thundering with the sound of a thundercloud. On her stainless body, still as the autumnal sky, she has sportively, like the young cuckoo, the great time with his sweet voice, like that of the melodious flute. Her victorious bow is the non-existence of all, and her arrows the created pains. Thus, at the time of pralaya, or deluge, does she dance and reel everywhere, at her sweet will and pleasure with great radiance. Besides, she wears on her head swarga as her head ornament, and on her feet patala, the many hells strung on her leg ornaments. The sun and the moon are her ear ornaments, the Himalayas her bones, and Mahameru her golden ornament, and the Chakravala mountain her girdle. Sometimes she will ride on the peacock vehicle of Subramanya, the son of Shiva, inclining backwards and moving to and fro. Sometimes she will assume the head of the Rudras, having 3 eyes and the terrible moon on their head. Sometimes she will wear on her person as a chauri the beautiful locks of the goddess Parameswari, or the writhing, headless, living trunks of the mighty and terrific Bhairavas. Or she will carry as an alms bowl the body of Devendra shining with 1,000 eyes, wearing on her neck the garland of skulls strung together by the bodily muscles. She will annihilate all the worlds in a manner terrific even unto herself, and stay in the one shining Akasha. It is this terrific woman that at the time of the great pralaya dances with joy, with the garlands in her breast composed of the lotuses, the round heads of all-pervading Vishnu. All the objects heretofore described by me are not real. This dire mind arises only through ahankara. All the physical objects are dead to me. I am not able to know the end and aim of these births. Therefore, my mind falters and is afflicted through mental cares. The diseases of desires preponderate in all. It is rare to find those high-souled men who are free from the intense mists of desires. This my youth, which is well fitted for the acquisition of the higher spiritual ends, is now vainly spent in fruitless endeavors. Association with the wise. True love for great personages is at a great discount, and hence the path of moksha, salvation, is not known. So it is that it is rare to attain Atma Tattva, as the impure mind of man has not the good-heartedness or benevolence to consider others' happiness as its own. It is ever reeling. Again, as this mind has not the complacency to rejoice at another's virtue, there is no internal contentment. Then, as it does not consider others' pains as its own, there arises not compassion in it. Again, if it is not indifferent to the vicious actions of others, baseness of mind, however distant, will overtake it, and then cowardice will take the place of courage. Else persons degraded into hell will again return to Swarga. It is very easy to contract association with the ignorant, but it is very hard to do so with the truly illuminated. All thoughts of objects which appear but to perish produce bondage only. All the hosts of egos which are the result of their vasanas separate themselves from their bodies and go to heaven or hell. All the quarters will cease to exist in the absence of the sun which differentiates them. All countries visited get new appellations and change with times. The grandest mountains are scattered to dust. When Sat, the reality alone, prevails, at the time of deluge, the three worlds of Bhu, Antakariksha, and Deva, or Swarga, perish. The oceans become parched up. Stars are pulverized and scattered in space, and the host of Devas and the Asuras disappear. Then Siddhas will be annihilated. Dhruva, polar star, will die. The Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Rudra, will be absorbed in the supreme reality. Time, the power of Iswara, who through his Sankalpa produces creation, along with its law of ordination, comes to an end. The all-full Akasha perishes, and even the ancient visible macrocosm becomes merged in the non-dual Parameswara, the Supreme Lord, who is the liberator from the delusion of Maya, the one reality above the reach of speech and mind, and the one jnana completely devoid of any stains. People in this world die, ever being engaged in such frivolous thoughts as the following: this time is an auspicious one. This is the spring season for doing work. What is the best time favorable for pilgrimage? Relatives only grace an occasion. I cannot hereafter attain the like of the enjoyment I had at such and such a time, and such like. If after resolving within themselves to act out the lives of the great wise ones, they do not utilize the day for this purpose, how can they expect to have sound sleep at nights? Having centered all their affections upon wife, children, and wealth, as if they were nectar, and having identified themselves with them, they ever accumulate wealth for them. But if those much longed-for things disappear through some mishap, their sorrow knows no bounds. Having vanquished all enemies, some men come into the safe possession of immense wealth without any rivals. But lo, Yama glides in from some covert place and puts an end to all their fond and cherished hopes. All the illusions called wives, sons, etc. are like so many wayfarers who meet together in the course of a journey. Even Brahmas die in a kalpa, which is but a moment of time, compared to eternity. It is absurd on the part of our mind, with its very limited perception of time, to attempt to know anything about the extreme smallness or greatness of time. All men are subject to diverse pains only. The really learned are very few in number. All the manifold karmas of the different castes or orders of life generate pains and are illusory. How then am I to live amidst such pains? Let me walk in that path in which I shall be freed from all actions involving me in auspicious days, great wealth, etc., and become of the nature of thought itself. All things generating pains in this world, such as dangers, wealth, birth, death, and others, perish in the instant of time stated in our books of computation. A brave warrior dies at the hands of a coward, and 100 persons die through one man's hand. How men of cringing spirit exalt themselves to the status of lords. Thus is the wheel of time gyrating without any limit. Therefore, in my mind, severely scalded by the forest fire of these earthly stains, there will not arise the ever-increasing desire of wealth like the misconception of mirage in a desert. I do not long for a life of royal pleasures or for death which is inevitable to it. Therefore, I shall rather be as I am now, without any pains to suffer from. But then there is the despondency in my mind, harrowing me, which I have to free myself from. And if you, through your well-trained mind, cannot remove it now, when else would it be done? Even the most virulent of poisons is no poison to me, but the sensual objects are truly so. The former defiles one body only, whereas the latter adulterates many bodies in successive rebirths. Pleasures, pains, relatives, friends, life, death, and all others will in no way enthrall the mind of the emancipated wise. To them, this passing life is like water drops sprinkled by the wind, and the sensual enjoyments like a lightning flash. Also the period of youth which is conducive to man's salvation, if properly utilized, is only ephemeral. Having reflected well upon these things, quiescent sages like yourself are ever engaged in deep samadhi meditation. The proclivities of my discriminative mind are also towards the identification of myself with Kutastha Brahman, but like a lady separated from her deaf lord, my mind will neither attain the certainty of Brahma nor incline towards material desires. Therefore, in this dilemma of mine, please point out to me that ever-resplendent and eternal seat devoid of pains, frailties, upadis, or vehicles of matter, doubt or delusion. What is that eternal state unapproachable by pains wherein I shall remain unscathed by the fire of sensual objects, though moving in them, like a ball of mercury exposed to fire, like the ocean which is nothing else but its waters? Samsara, mundane existence, rests on words only, proceeding from the power of speech. How did the righteous great ones manage to avoid the pains of this world? Please be gracious enough to import to me that certainty of yours. Does not this supreme state exist? Is there not this state, sthiti, of quiescence? If so, will not anyone unlock me to the real mysteries? Otherwise I shall not through my efforts alone be able to attain the quiescent state. For being devoid of doubt and ahankara, I shall not perform my duties. Neither food, not sweet water, nor fine clothes will I long for. I shall not perform the daily ceremonies of bathing, giving, etc. My mind will not incline towards wielding the regal scepter or towards pleasures or pains. Without love or hatred, I shall only remain silent and be desireless, statue-like. Thus did Rama, with a face like the stainless, cool, full moon, of sweet assent and a mind now full-blown through atmic discrimination, deliver himself before the assembly of the joyful Munis and then remains silent, like a peacock, ceasing its cry at the sight of the sable threatening clouds.